Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Alejandro Perez, the CGI Nerd, and in this video we're going to take a look at how to um, basically destroy a fence. We're going to be using rigid bodies, and we are going to collide this boulder into the wooden fence that we have here, and the simulation ends up looking something like this. And yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so here in the scene, I have a boulder, I have the fence, and I have the ground. So I'm going to have this boulder smash into the fence and break it apart using rigid bodies. And the boulder is basically a rock that I built. If you want to see a tutorial on how to build that, I have one. You can see it here on the iCard, or a link is down in the description. And the same thing for the fence. I have a tutorial for this where I'll put a link on the iCard and in the description. The ground is just a grid with a mountain node. Adjusted some of the settings so that it looked good, and then added some color to it. Now we need to get the dynamics working for this in the scene. The ground is the easy one, so let's start with that. Let's go to collisions and make that a static object. It's going to take a few moments, and then soon we'll see the auto-dot network that it creates for us. It is basically the ground imported in here, attached to a static solver, and then we have some gravity and then the output for it. Okay, and then everything else that we do is going to feed into this auto-dot network that we're creating here. Let's do the boulder now. And what I'm going to do is make this a RBD object. And then let's go back into the auto-dot network, and we can see that we have that boulder here that was created. There's the geometry, and then here's the physics for it, or the solver for the physics for that. So here in the initial state, what I'm going to do is give it some velocity. It's going in the positive y direction, so let's say we put 50 in there. And if we do that, we should see that it moves forward. Let's give it some downward momentum also. So that way, oops, I went up. This should be a negative value. There we go. And let's try it again. So that way it breaks through the fence. It's going to bounce right before it and then break through. That is great. Boom. And it breaks through. I like that. Okay. Now let's go ahead and break up the fence. So we need to add physics to this, but we need to basically set up the geometry beforehand so that way we can get it working. I am going to make the fence white again at some point, but let's get rid of this for right now. And then from that tutorial that we were looking at that I told you guys that I did, this used to be a merge here. I just made it a Boolean, so that way it makes it all one piece of geometry for the fracture that we're going to be doing. Now I want to get the section of fence right here where it's going to break to be its own piece. So I'm going to do a Voronoi fracture. I'm going to scatter some points because it needs points going into the Voronoi fracture. And by default, it should create a ton of points, which I don't need. Let's bring it down to something like 5. And so that we can visualize it a little bit better. Output attributes. let's just do, yeah, instead of doing that, let's do a exploded view. And then I'm just going to scale this down so that we can see kind of what's happening. So this piece right here is too big. I just want kind of like this section here. So what I'm going to do is in the scatter, adjust the global seed value and change it until I get a section. Ooh, that was lucky. I have a section here that is what I want to break. Okay, so now that we know that we have a piece that works, I'm going to get rid of the exploded view because that was just to help us visualize everything. I'm going to do a blast node. By default, it's just going to get rid of everything, but in the Voronoi fracture, each piece gets a prefix piece, and we can actually go in and select a piece. So here we deleted something. We can go through and figure out what piece it is that we need. It's not 0. And basically we just need to go through one by one, and there's only 5 pieces, so it's not, or 6 pieces actually. So it's not going to take too long. 3, nope. 4, there we go. That's the piece we want. So now that we have that, I'm going to copy and paste this. So that way we have one where we're going to have all the other parts of the fence, and then another one where we are going to have the reverse. So if we click on delete non-selected, it will just keep that part of the fence. Okay, so now I want to set up the Voronoi fracture for this, so that way we have the pieces that will break apart. So if we just set it up kind of similar to what we just did, let's say we did a scatter here, and then we do a Voronoi fracture and connect these. We get the pieces, but you can see that it doesn't really look like wood. It almost looks like blocks or like chunks of concrete or something like that. And all of this is really low poly, but it gives us the idea of what we want. So we want kind of longer pieces and maybe not as many. So let's say instead of 1,000, let's do 100. And that's probably better. But we want kind of long, thin pieces. Maybe we can do more pieces than this. Let's try 300. I can work with that. So what we're going to do is basically transform it beforehand, squish it, and then retransform it afterwards to get it back to its normal size. So I'm going to do a transform. And this is going to connect to these nodes like that. And the scale for the Y, I'm going to put it at 0.1. So it squishes it way down here. Then basically at this point we want to retransform it back. So we're going to do transform. And here, since 0.1 is 1/10 of 1, we can make this 10, and it brings it back to the normal size. And if we look at the exploded view, we can see that now they look more like splintering of the wood rather than how it was a moment ago, where it was more chunky, like if it was cement or something like that. So that works good. The only problem is this section where we are getting hit by the geometry, by the boulder. I want much smaller pieces. And this could be okay, but what I like to do also is do a ISO offset and attach it here and get more definition here. So that way we get points on the inside of the geometry as well. So if we look at the exploded view now, we kind of have more splintering on the inside and internal pieces where we didn't have that a moment ago. So this looks a lot better. But I want more detailed breaking in this section here. So I'm going to add a color. Actually, after the blast, I'm going to add it here. So I basically have this geometry there. And this color, I'm going to make it kind of a dark color. Actually, let's make it completely black. Then I'm going to do a point, or sorry, not point, but paint color. And then I'm going to paint a little bit of white in this section. And let's add some color over here. Let's look at the bottom, make sure it's colored all the way through there. Okay, so that gives us kind of an idea of what we want. Then what I can do is a scatter. So I'm going to scatter, but what I can do is do an attribute density attribute and attach it to the color. So that way all the points that we get are going to be focused in this area here. And this one, let's maybe bring it down to like 500. And what we can do is add a merge. And then merge both sets of points together here. Except that we need to scale it down. So let's make a copy of this and attach it here so that way it scales down. And here it's saying it has a mixed match of attributes, but that's fine because it's calculating everything the way we need it to be. And you can see that there's a much higher density of points and smaller pieces in this area where it's going to be the focus of the breaking. Okay, so I'm going to save the project so that we don't lose work from here. Let's go over here. I'll bring back the rest of the fence later. I just want to make sure that we get this part working. So what I'm going to do is on this fence, let's make it an RBD fractured, RBD packed, and then I need to select the fence and then push enter. Now it calculates it out. Let's go back to frame 1 and then push play. So that is working. There are some problems with it, but it is working the way I want it to be. One of the problems that we're having is that it's falling with gravity all the way from the beginning. So what we can do is we can figure out when it's going to hit and activate it right before that. So at frame 11 it hits, so at frame 10 we can look at fence, and let's make this creation frame 10. Actually, no. What we want is to activate this. Let's see. Anyways, this isn't how we're going to end up doing it, but there is a way to activate this. Let's do that. Nope. Okay, so let's not worry about that since we're not going to end up using it for the final version anyways. Let's set up the rest of the fence because we'll need part of that in order to make this work. So going back into the fence, we have all of this, but we have this other area here that is going to need to be part of everything. So we could merge it back here before all of this. That's one option. And sometimes this works. So we have all of this here. And then let's go back to frame 1. And we can see that it falls, but everything else is pretty solid there. We can see that it breaks apart part of it over there. Also, like a lot of this fence is kind of holding it together. So it makes the boulder bounce off of it. We can adjust some of the physics attributes to adjust that. So if we go to the boulder, we go to the physical attributes of there, we can make it a more dense rock and also make it less bouncing. So let's maybe put it at 0.1. And then let's push play. So that is that, and then let's look at the fence. And I want to adjust the physical attributes, and let's put it like at 0.001 or something like that, or like a really small value. So hopefully it doesn't hold it back, but we can see that everything kind of flies off, which is not exactly what we want. We just want that part where it breaks to do that. So in order to adjust that, basically we don't want it to come in and be part of that part of simulation. We want it to be a static object instead. So what we can do is let's create a null node so we can find this easy. And then let's say this is out underscore geo. Let's specify this a little bit more. Static underscore geo, and this is all in capitals so that it's easier to find. Now I'm going to create a new geometry node. And inside of this geometry node, we're going to do an object merge. Gonna click on that button there, go to the fence, and we can see that it pops up right on top because we made it all capitals on the null node here. Let's accept that. This is going to be our static fence. We merged that object there. Let's double check in the fence to make sure it works when we have it here. That is what we want. Yes, indeed. So let's jump out of there, and then let's go to the dop import on this one. We should be seeing it in this. Let's see if we go to the blast. In the static object, it should be visible here. Okay, let me save the project. And then I'm going to restart Houdini. It might be that it didn't update correctly. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll be right back. Okay, so I figured out what's going on. It did bring in the object into the scene. The problem is that if we zoom out, it is not lined up correctly where we want it. So what we can do is basically just parent these together and it will snap it into place where we want it. And everything should be lined up exactly. Okay. Now let's take this object here and I'm going to make it a static object. So let's go to collisions and static object. Now if we go into the Autodot network, we have the static fence attached here. And then we have the other elements over on the rigid body versus the static object. So let's play this and test out the simulation real quick. Which is kind of nice. The other thing I'm kind of thinking on is, do I even want to make this static object? Because what I noticed is that, let's remove this as a static object. And if I go here, I need to make sure that I get rid of everything past the object merge. Okay. That when we look at the simulation here, I like the way it breaks through a lot better now when it's not colliding with this stuff. So that's something to kind of consider. I can maybe turn on the object later if I wanted to, but I think I'm going to keep it off because it makes it break a little bit nicer. Now what I need to do is stop this from breaking before it is hit by the boulder. So what we can do is here in the fence, I'm going to go into the rigid body section, and if I scroll over more this way, we have a glue adjacent button. So I'm going to click that. The RBD object that I want to do it on is the fence object. Then I can push enter. Oops, I went into it. I don't necessarily need to do that there, but over here, then it creates all of these nodes for us. And basically it glues everything together. And right now the glue is pretty strong, so it's sticking together all the way. Now what we can do is in the glue constraint, if we wanted to, like bring this much lower. And that's probably like really low. It's gonna start breaking a lot easier. Point 1. There we go. So we have it breaking at that stage. Let's see, is it falling apart beforehand? No. Maybe this is all I will need to do. We can put it at like 0.01. Let's see how that looks. I kind of like that by default, so I think I'm gonna leave it at this stage right here for the breaking simulation. You can see that there's bigger chunks that stay together. I can play around with this value to get it to be exactly what we want. So obviously not that much because it's all sticking together a bit too much. And then here we can see that it's going through that. So maybe just at that 0.01 value, it's going to be enough. And here we can see that it's breaking through it's going through the geometry over here. And it's kind of sticking together, which is kind of interesting. You can see that it sticks together and it breaks apart as it hits the ground more times, until it's completely disintegrated by the time it gets over here. So what we can do is adjust the physics for the fence a little bit more. We can look at the physical attributes and maybe the bounce, bring that down. The friction, maybe bring it up a little bit. That's pretty interesting with the way it breaks. So all these things, it hits it kind of twice, which is kind of funny, and it brings it straight to the camera. Let's bring the bounce a little bit lower. And rotational stiffness. Let's see if we can bring this up a little bit higher and see the effect that we have on it. Then you can see that this ends up right on the camera in the front of the scene. So I like that. We can also play around with the physical attributes of the ground. So the friction's at 1. Let's bring the bounce down. Let's bring this bounce down. Okay. So let's play this now. I don't like that. Let's put this back at 1 and test this out. Let's put this at 0.5. I think I just like the default looking a lot more. And then let's go back to the fence and the rotational stiffness. I like that it's less than it was before, but maybe not as much. The way that ended up turning out, where it looks like they're like arrows flying towards you, it's pretty funny. Let's put this at like 1.5. Um, 1.2. Because I just want to... Whoa! It really grabbed on to... Oh, the friction is much higher, that's why. Let's bring this down. The reason I brought it up is because it slides a lot on the ground. I like that quite a bit. I don't need the sequence to be this long. Let's put it at like 96 frames, and we have it at real time. So that looks pretty good. You can see over here, it kind of shifts into the other fence. I can play around at this point a little bit more if I wanted to try to bring this back in as a static object. It might kind of move us backwards though, but it will prevent it from going inside of the other object. But we'll see if it's worth it. So that's a bit awkward because it's moving backwards. So we can try with the glue constraint, maybe making it weaker. But if we make it too weak, it will start falling apart like it is here beforehand. I want to make sure that it's strong enough to stay together and it's not falling apart beforehand, but that it is weak enough to break when it gets hit without going backwards. So here we can see that it's really kind of not working that great with the collisions. So I'm going to go backwards again and remove these things. And let's look at the animation again. Looks really good except for that little part there. Let me see if adjusting the glue constraint a little bit more. 0.05, let's make it 0.08. So that works a lot better. I like that a lot better. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to stick with. So, as you can see, a lot of this is just going through and adjusting the settings to make sure you get it looking the way you want it to look. So, I'm going to render this out, and then I can show you what the final result looks like. Okay, so this is how the sequence ended up turning out. I made a few tweaks as I finished everything up, but you can see that everything kind of shatters into just shards or splinters of wood. So there's kind of more cleanup that could potentially be done on it, but I think this is kind of a good example of what could be done to simulate a breaking of a fence. All right. So I hope you found this useful. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.